The Adagio Mystery. Why we love beautiful lies. On a quiet evening somewhere in the world, a concert hall falls silent. A single melody rises from the strings, slow, grieving, almost unbearably beautiful. Many listeners recognize it instantly. Some know it from films. Others remember hearing it at memorial services, funerals, or moments of national mourning. For millions, it is simply one of the most moving pieces of classical music ever written. Its title is familiar, Albinoni's Adagio. For decades, audiences believed they were listening to a masterpiece rescued from the ruins of World War II, a lost treasure from the Baroque era, composed by the Venetian musician Tommaso Albinoni more than 3 centuries ago. The story was irresistible. It was also at best only partly true. Today, most scholars agree that the famous Adagio in G minor is largely the work of a 20th century musicologist named Remo Giazotto. Yet the deeper mystery is not who wrote the piece. The deeper mystery is why the world wanted so badly to believe that Albinoni wrote it. A masterpiece from the ashes. The story begins in 1945. Europe was emerging from the devastation of World War II. Among the cities reduced to rubble was Dresden, Germany. The city had suffered catastrophic bombing in February of that year, and its famous state library contained countless musical manuscripts, damaged or destroyed during the war. A few years later, an Italian musicologist named Remo Giazotto announced an extraordinary discovery. Giazotto was no obscure scholar. He was one of the world's leading experts on Tommaso Albinoni, the 18th century Venetian composer whose music he had spent years cataloging and studying. According to Giazotto, he had obtained a fragment of an unknown Albinoni manuscript associated with the devastated Dresden library. The fragment supposedly contained little more than a bass line and a few bars of melody from a church sonata. From that tiny scrap of music, he claimed he reconstructed an entire composition. The result was published in 1958 under the title Adagio in G minor on 2 thematic ideas and on a figured bass by Tommaso Albinoni. Few listeners paid much attention to the lengthy title. They simply heard the music, and they loved it. The piece that conquered the world. The Adagio spread rapidly through concert halls, recordings, films, and television. Its mournful beauty seemed universal, unlike many classical compositions that remain largely confined to specialists. The Adagio crossed cultural boundaries. It appeared in movies, documentaries, memorial ceremonies, and popular music recordings. Rock musicians borrowed from it. It became one of the most recognizable pieces ever associated with classical music. Ironically, the work became far more famous than any authenticated composition by Tommaso Albinoni himself. For many listeners, Albinoni became known primarily for a piece that may not have been his. The evidence begins to crumble. As the Adagio's popularity grew, scholars began asking questions. Where was the original manuscript fragment? Could anyone examine it? Could it be photographed? Could it be cataloged? The answers remained frustratingly vague. Years passed, then decades. No original manuscript appeared. Even more curious, Giazotto's own account began to shift. At first, he suggested that the fragment had been discovered among the remains of Dresden. Later, he sometimes implied that he had received a copy from another source rather than finding it himself. In interviews late in life, he occasionally seemed to acknowledge that the famous work was essentially his own creation, a tribute to Albinoni rather than a true reconstruction. The story kept changing. The evidence remained elusive. A clue hidden in plain sight. Then there was another problem: the music itself. To ordinary listeners, the Adagio sounded convincingly old. To musicologists, it sounded surprisingly modern. Authentic Baroque music is typically elegant, balanced, and carefully structured. Emotional expression certainly exists, but it is generally restrained. The rhythms are clear. The architecture is precise. The Adagio feels different. Its massive string sonorities swell like waves. Its organ accompaniment creates a dark, cathedral-like atmosphere. Its harmonies linger in grief. Its emotional language is lush, dramatic, and intensely personal. In many ways, it sounds less like an 18th century Venetian composer and more like a romantic composer from the 19th century, or even a 20th century film composer. The piece possesses a kind of cinematic sorrow that Baroque composers rarely employed. To many scholars, this was among the strongest clues. The music did not merely sound unlike Albinoni, it sounded unlike the Baroque era itself. The copyright question. One detail made the story even stranger. Legally, Giazotto copyrighted the work under his own name. That fact raises an intriguing question. If he genuinely believed he had merely reconstructed an Albinoni composition, why did he register himself as the copyright holder? The contradiction has never been fully explained. Publicly, the piece was associated with Albinoni. Legally and financially, it belonged to Giazotto. Some historians see this as evidence that he always understood the Adagio to be fundamentally his own creation. Others believe he regarded himself as both editor and composer. Whatever his motives, the copyright tells an important story. When royalties arrived, they did not go to Albinoni's estate. They went to Remo Giazotto, the fragment that refused to die. For years, the fragment seemed almost mythical. A musical ghost story passed from one generation of scholars to the next. Then, in the early 21st century, musicologist Nicholas Schneider made an intriguing discovery. Buried in the archives of the Saxon State Library was a photocopy of a transcription that closely matched Giazotto's description. A bass line and a few bars of melody from what appeared to be a church sonata. The discovery changed the debate. It suggested that Giazotto had not completely invented the existence of a fragment. Something resembling his description may indeed have existed. Yet the discovery also strengthened another conclusion. The fragment was tiny. The famous Adagio is not. The fragment contains only a handful of musical ideas. The finished work contains hundreds of measures of harmony, orchestration, development, and emotional architecture. Even if the fragment was genuine, nearly everything listeners hear in the Adagio appears to come from Giazotto. Some scholars believe that only a trace of Albinoni remains in the finished work. Why hide behind a dead composer? This question leads to the most fascinating part of the story. Why present the work this way in the first place? Part of the answer may lie in the musical climate of the 1950s. At the time, much of the classical establishment was fascinated by modernism. Experimental music, dissonance, and avant-garde techniques dominated many academic circles. A lush, emotionally direct, deeply romantic composition might have seemed old-fashioned, sentimental, outdated. But attach the name of an 18th century master to the same music, and everything changes. The audience listens differently. Critics listen differently. The work acquires historical dignity. Instead of asking whether it is fashionable, people ask whether it is authentic. Perhaps Giazotto understood this. Perhaps he recognized a truth about human nature. We do not hear music in a vacuum. We hear it through the authority of names, histories, and myths. Other musical imposters. The Adagio is not the only musical work to wear someone else's name. One of the most famous examples involved violin virtuoso Fritz Kreisler. For years, Kreisler performed charming pieces that he claimed to have discovered among forgotten manuscripts by composers, such as Vivaldi, Corelli, and Couperin. Audiences adored them. Critics praised them. Then in 1935, Kreisler confessed. He had written many of them himself. His explanation was revealing. He later admitted that he felt uncomfortable filling concert programs entirely with his own compositions. Presenting the pieces under historical names seemed less arrogant and more acceptable to audiences. The scandal briefly shocked the musical world, yet people continued to love the music. As Kreisler famously observed, the names had changed, but the value remained. Another famous case involved French violinist Marius Cassadesus. In 1933, he introduced what he claimed was a newly discovered violin concerto by Mozart, supposedly dedicated by the young composer to Princess Adelaide of France. Audiences were thrilled. Scholars debated its authenticity for decades. Then, during a copyright dispute in 1977, Casadesus confessed that he had composed the work himself. The lost Mozart masterpiece had never existed. The pattern was becoming familiar. Listeners loved the music first. The truth arrived later. The ultimate irony. The greatest irony concerns Tommaso Albinoni himself. He was no minor figure. Born in Venice in 1671, Albinoni composed operas, concertos, sonatas, and chamber works admired throughout Europe. He was particularly influential in the development of the oboe concerto, and his music was respected by contemporaries including Johann Sebastian Bach. Yet today, when most people hear the name Albinoni, they think of a piece he probably did not write. His public identity and modern reputation have become inseparable from another man's composition, and yet there is a strange justice in that. Without the Adagio, many modern listeners might never have heard Albinoni's name at all. A disputed masterpiece helped preserve the memory of a real composer. The deception became a form of immortality. The Cellist in the Ruins. In May 1992, during the siege of Sarajevo, 22 civilians were killed while waiting in line for bread. The next day, cellist Vedran Smailović carried his instrument into the shattered streets and began to play. For weeks, he returned to the ruins, performing amid sniper fire and falling shells as an act of mourning and defiance. Among the pieces associated with those performances was the famous Adagio attributed to Albinoni. It is difficult to imagine a stronger test of a work's value. In that moment, no one cared whether the melody came from an 18th century Venetian composer or a 20th century Italian musicologist. The music had escaped the argument. It had become something larger than its origins. The real mystery. So who composed the Adagio? Most scholars today conclude that the work is largely Giazotto's creation. A fragment may have existed, but the music that conquered the world, the aching harmonies, the soaring strings, the unforgettable emotional journey, appears to have come primarily from his imagination. Yet reducing the story to a simple verdict misses its deeper significance. The real mystery is not musical, it is human. Why are we so captivated by lost masterpieces? Why do we trust a melody more when it comes wrapped in the authority of history? Why did audiences embrace a 20th century composition only after it was disguised as something ancient? Perhaps because we love stories as much as we love music. A beautiful melody rescued from the ashes of Dresden is irresistible. A modern scholar writing an homage in 1958 is merely interesting. The first story sounds like a legend. The second sounds like a footnote. And so the world chose the legend. Today, the piece is often credited simply as Albinoni Giazotto. That may be the fairest solution. One man supplied the name. The other supplied most of the music. Together, they created one of classical music's most enduring myths and one of its most beloved masterpieces. Whether we call it Albinoni's Adagio or Giazotto's Adagio, the final irony remains. The deception was uncovered. The mystery was largely solved. And yet the music survived. Perhaps that is the strongest proof of its greatness.
It's time to study new words in context. 1. Musicologist. Definition: a person who studies the history, theory, and meaning of music. Example: the musicologist spent years studying the works of Mozart. 2. Catastrophic. Definition: very bad and causing great damage or loss. Example: the earthquake caused catastrophic damage to the city. 3. Authenticated. Definition: proven to be real or genuine. Example: experts authenticated the old painting before it was sold. 4. Crumble. Definition: to slowly break apart, become weaker or fall apart. Example: their plan began to crumble after new facts came out. 5. Elusive. Definition: hard to find, catch, or understand. Example: the answer remained elusive even after many hours of searching. 6. Restrained. Definition: calm, controlled, and not showing strong feelings. Example: she gave a restrained smile instead of laughing loudly. 7. Sonorities. Definition: the rich and special sounds made by voices or musical instruments. Example: the deep sonorities of the organ filled the church. 8. Lush. Definition: rich, full, and beautiful. Example: the movie used lush music to create a romantic feeling. 9. Dissonance. Definition: a combination of musical sounds that does not sound pleasant or smooth together. Example: the composer used dissonance to create a feeling of tension. 10. Avant-garde. Definition: very new, different, and often unusual in art or music. Example: the artist became famous for his avant-garde paintings. 11. Imposter. Definition: a person who pretends to be someone else in order to fool people. Example: the imposter claimed to be a doctor, but he was not. 12. Virtuoso. Definition: a person who has great skill in playing a musical instrument. Example: the young pianist became a virtuoso before the age of 20. 13. Arrogant. Definition: thinking you are better or more important than other people. Example: his arrogant attitude made it hard for others to like him. 14. Defiance. Definition: openly refusing to obey or accept someone or something. Example: she faced danger with courage and defiance. 15. Verdict. Definition: a final decision or judgment about something. Example: the jury gave its verdict after a long discussion. 16. Captivated. Definition: filled with great interest or attention. Example: the children were captivated by the magician's performance. 17. Homage. Definition: something done to show respect, honor, or admiration for someone. Example: the movie was made as a homage to old silent films.
Comprehension questions. 1. What is the famous mystery surrounding Albinoni's Adagio? Answer: the mystery is whether Tommaso Albinoni really composed the famous Adagio in G minor, or whether it was mostly written by Remo Giazotto. 2. Who was Remo Giazotto? Answer: he was an Italian musicologist who studied Albinoni's music, and later published the famous Adagio in G minor in 1958. 3. What did Giazotto claim he had discovered after World War II? Answer: he claimed he had found a small musical fragment from an unknown work by Albinoni that came from the damaged Dresden State Library. 4. Why did many scholars begin to doubt Giazotto's story? Answer: they doubted the story because the original manuscript was never produced, and Giazotto's explanation changed over time. 5. What musical evidence made experts question whether Albinoni wrote the Adagio? Answer: the music sounds more like Romantic music than Baroque music. It has rich string sounds, deep emotion, and dramatic harmonies that were unusual for Baroque composers. 6. Why is the copyright of the Adagio important? Answer: Giazotto copyrighted the work under his own name, even though he publicly connected it with Albinoni. This raised questions about who really composed it. 7. What discovery did musicologist Nicola Schneider make? Answer: she found a photocopy of a transcription that matched Giazotto's description of a small musical fragment, suggesting that some kind of fragment may have existed. 8. According to most scholars today, who wrote most of the Adagio? Answer: most scholars believe that Remo Giazotto composed almost all of the music. 9. Why might Giazotto have used Albinoni's name instead of his own? Answer: some people believe he thought audiences would respect and accept the music more if they believed it was written by a famous Baroque composer. 10. What does the article say about the way people listen to music? Answer: it says that people do not hear music in a vacuum. They are influenced by famous names, history, and popular stories. 11. How did Fritz Kreisler fool the musical world? Answer: he claimed that several pieces he had written were actually forgotten works by famous composers from the past. 12. Why did Fritz Kreisler say he used other composers' names? Answer: he said he thought it would seem arrogant to fill his concert programs with only his own compositions. 13. What did Marius Cassadesus pretend to discover? Answer: He claimed he had found a lost violin concerto by Mozart, but many years later he admitted that he had written it himself. 14. Why is the story of the cellist of Sarajevo important in the article? Answer. It shows that the emotional power of music can matter more than knowing exactly who composed it. 15. What is the main message of the article? Answer. The article suggests that although discovering the true composer is important, the bigger question is why people are drawn to beautiful stories, and why they often value music more when it is connected to famous names in history.